ladies and gentlemen, welcome to TVP World. You're watching another edition of Press Corner, where me, along with other journalists, columnists, and esteemed guests, round up the most pressing topics of the week. Now, here in Press Corner, we celebrate the privilege of a free press by having diverse opinions and people of all political opinions. And here, you'll be the judge. Now, without further ado, let's get ourselves acquainted with our guests and the panel. First, starting with the lady, we have Karolina Wójcicka, journalist from Dziennik Gazeta Prawna. We have Wojciech Albert Łobodziński, editor from the Polish press agency. On my right here, Mr. Jacek Żakowski, columnist from Collegium Civitas. And last but not least, Mr. Piotr Drabik, political reporter from Fakt. Hello, guys, and welcome here to Press Corner.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
So, first of all, the first topic on the menu will be Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Poland and subsequently to Ukraine. This, of course, comes at the heel of the 33rd Independence Day of Ukraine, as well as, well, just a month ago, the Prime Minister has also visited Russia. So what's that all about? We'll be discussing that, but first, let's take a look at a report.
From hugging Russia's strongman Putin just over a month ago to falling into the embrace of Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky on Friday. Up until now, India has shied away from explicitly condemning Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, Modi is changing course, portraying India as a possible peacemaker between the warring neighbors.
We were never neutral, and we had a side right from the first day. Our side was peace, the respect, the support, the respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. This is of utmost priority to us. And last month as well, when I visited Russia to meet President Putin, I told him very clearly that problems cannot be resolved on the battlefield. It is a historic moment. It is the first visit of an Indian Prime Minister to independent Ukraine. Thank you for India's support of our sovereignty and territorial integrity over these 2 years.
Despite the exchange of sympathies, there were no signs of breakthrough. Moreover, Indian Foreign Minister Subrahmanyam Jaishankar later said it was clearly a complex issue. The FM also treaded carefully the ground of sanctions against Moscow.
In India, we do not impose sanctions on any country. It's not part of our political, diplomatic history. If at all there are sanctions, we generally look at UN sanctions. Those are the sanctions that we respect.
India has steered clear of seconding UN sanctions over the invasion, a topic that, according to the Indian Foreign Minister, was touched upon by Modi and Zelensky during their meeting. India also continues buying Russian oil in generous quantities, recently becoming its global leading importer.
So, starting from you, Karolina, can you help us understand whether or not you think this visit from the Indian Prime Minister to Poland and subsequently to Ukraine is more of a symbolic one, or do you think it is more substantive?
Oh, it's not only a symbolic visit because, yes, of course, India is trying to repair its image in the West, specifically because of the visit to Moscow that was very unfortunate for Prime Minister Modi because it happened on the day when Russia striked a hospital in Kyiv, a children's hospital in Kyiv. So he wanted to sort of balance the relationship with the West and travel to Ukraine and Poland as well. But, for Poland, for example, India is going to become for the third largest economy in 2027, according to IMF. So there's endless opportunities for our businesses there. And it's good to explore those chances, especially that Indian Prime Minister hasn't visited Poland for 45 years. Yeah. So it's a good opportunity to talk about defense cooperation, IT cooperation. There's so many topics that we can collaborate on, as India today is like China 20 or 30 years ago. And Asia is becoming more and more important on the global economic scene. So I believe that it's a new beginning for both our relations, Polish-Indian relations, as well as Ukrainian-Indian relations, because they also talked about economy and trade.
All right. So, like Karolina has just mentioned, there's a lot of business opportunity and a lot of discussion when it comes to the economic aspect of things. But when it comes to the war in Ukraine, there's seemed to be an attempt at playing the peacemaker while not really providing a lot of concrete, plans instead of just kind of exchanging a lot of pleasantries. Do you think that India will be able to become that peacemaker that eventually at least smooth out the situation in Ukraine?
You know, since the summit in Switzerland, the peace summit, Ukraine peace summit in Switzerland, we've been hearing that there is going to be some kind of peace deal on the table provided by China and India. I've been hearing that from my friends in Kyiv, from different Ukrainian journalists and so on. And the visit in Moscow was somehow set up in order to smooth things out with Russia and then think about getting both parties to the negotiation table. However, I think right now, with the attack on the hospital at the day of visit of Narendra Modi's visit in Moscow, and now with Kursk incursion, invasion, whatever, the peace deal is nowhere to be seen right now. So I guess this visit that we've seen is somehow ended up in a quandary. I mean, no party knows what to do next since Putin is not going to any negotiation. He declared that. Maybe something will change, maybe not. But there is still a lot to work out here. And we are in the same place as we did a couple of months ago.
Unfortunately, it does look like we are still stuck in the same situation. Jacek, can you tell us a little bit about this potential peace plan? Because, since the beginning of the war, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been saying that we will not go into a peace deal on Russia's term, but more and more discussion about potentially negotiating is surfacing. And these two messages seem to be a little bit conflicting. Or am I missing something?
Well, I don't think politicians say the truth, say what they think in this so complicated situation. So we should rather observe what they do than listen what they are saying. And the offensive, Ukrainian offensive on Kursk is much more important than words. They say, well, you have a hostage land and we have a hostage land. Let's exchange. Is it an idea? Perhaps, we are not sure. But looking at the Modi visit in Poland and Ukraine, I think this is extremely important because it's not about the war, this war, and it's not about economics. It's about geopolitical construct, which appears to be a bit new. It's not American-centric anymore. And we know China is a problem for the West. And the question is, where is India in this debate, in this conflict? And it seems that India tries to gain as much as possible from the very difficult situation of Russia. And it takes a lot of oil, but it doesn't pay for it. This is the fantastic opportunity. Take as much oil as possible and pay nothing, or pay with rupiah, and what can they buy for rupiah? So this is very intelligent politics. And we have intelligent partner in Far Asia. This is extremely important for the entire West, because we have also enemy in China and Russia. So yes, I think war is important, but the future of the world is much more important.
All right, and let's dissect it a little bit more when it comes to words, Mr. Drabik. And I'll throw a little bit of wrench into this because we saw Polish President Andrzej Duda also being in Ukraine for the 33rd Independence Day. And some people are kind of hyper-focusing on one of the exchanges they have where President Duda says, if Russia does indeed pull out, he'll be the first one to call and tell Ukraine, all right, stop the bombing. They pulled out, which Zelensky answered, well, I might be busy, my phone line might not be able to pick it up. Some people are seeing it as kind of being slightly disrespectful to the Polish president. Some people are saying, this is just like one of those ha-ha moments. What do you make of it?
Of course, what we observe in the last days is really important because show, how our part of the Europe is part of the global story about the globalization, about the geopolitics. Because at the same time when Modi was in Poland and Ukraine, the Chinese Prime Minister was in Minsk and Moscow and trying to, balance, between the, India trying to rebuild the influence in Europe. But at the same time, President Duda, trying to also, using this visit by Modi, also going to the Ukraine and trying to, showing how important is Poland in this, geopolitical, stuff, because that the Polish authorities see that we can use our position to, did our business and trying to also, be more strong, in this geopolitical race, let's say. And what is also important and very interesting for me that in every coverage about this Modi visit, that no one media and no one mainstream outlets not mention about the Modi policy in India, right? About this nationalism stuff, very controversial decisions. No one discussing about it in Poland, in Ukraine. We see India as a strong power with trying to balance between the China, Russia, United States, and so on. But we don't see what the Modi did in India inside.
All right, that's actually a very, very interesting perspective that you just brought up. What do you guys take of it? Do you think you can reflect on the internal politics of India and trying to extrapolate that as what he's doing right now as a pragmatic move for his country? Do you guys see anything kind of underlying here?
I mean, there's a difficult sort of relationship between China and India, and if we have to choose or at least balance our relationship with China, India is a good starting point. And as I mentioned before, India is becoming a very important player on the global arena. So no country is perfect, especially in the global south. So sometimes we have to, close our eyes and forget about internal politics and think about ourselves and about the opportunities that we can take from that, be it economics or peace in Ukraine. So, yeah.
Right. And I think that is also what the Indian Prime Minister is doing, right? Like Jacek mentioned, he is a very pragmatic man and is trying to also balance his own country's interest. So when it comes to his country's interest in Ukraine, some are saying that the perhaps slight pivot of his stance also have to do with India eyeing Ukraine's military-industrial complex. Do you think there's any kind of validity to that?
I guess there might be some kind of an edge there because after the war, when the peace is done already, there might be some kind of opportunities, especially technological opportunities, to somehow bypass, the non-existential relationships between India and US and so on. Right now, the military technology of India is based on Russian technology. So using Ukraine as a gateway for this kind of deals might be useful and profitable in the future for India. But right now, for me, I read this visit in a different context. We've seen last month the deal between Palestinian factions made in Beijing. We've seen last year the deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And India is somehow nowhere to be seen here. So while Xi Jinping is talking about peace in Middle East, peace in Ukraine, Modi is right now trying to somehow catch some kind of an action there. And we also somehow forgotten about the Bangladesh coup and revolution. In the history between Bangladesh and India, India was always active, always present. It helped achieve independence for Bangladesh. Now, in all of this turmoil, it was absent. So Narendra Modi's visit is somehow, multidimensional here, and it's hard to grasp what's going on right now because of the chaos in Ukraine and Kursk, for example.
Right. I think you also brought up a very good point. I think we here at Central Eastern Europe, we tend to have this tunnel vision on what's happening in our side of the world. But looking at the situation in India, there's also a lot of moving pieces right there. Do you think that, like what Mr. Łobodziński mentioned, there is going to somehow impact India's decision and Modi's calculation here, Mr. Jacek?
Well, no, I don't think so, in fact. Modi is awful guy. But he is better than Putin, and he's better than Xi, and even better than Orban. because there is still a lot of democracy in local elections or state elections throughout India. So it's a much more democratic state than, for example, Hungary. And I think he's much more Democrat than Kaczynski, for example. So, well, he's on bad side, but not that much. Apart from that, we used to mention him in one line with Putin and current autocrats. But I don't think this is very important as far as Indian internal policy is concerned, because Modi is so powerful in his country. He doesn't have to care very much about his internal future. He's rather a statesman who is looking for better position for his country, not in these difficult problems like Middle East, for example. Everybody touching Middle East creates problems for himself.
Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, so it's better to stay apart. But as far as the position in Europe, this is very important for India, because India needs European technological support in its conflict with China, in competition with China. Where will new inventions from Europe, which are very many still, go? To China or to India? This is the competition Modi must concern. And I think he avoided disaster, because he was very close to disaster and very close to be packed in one small box with Putin. Now he's in much better situation.
Right, like Karolina just mentioned earlier, perhaps this is a move to attempt to kind of reshape his image in the international arena. Last but not least, let's come back to you, Mr. Drabik. Can you help us understand whether or not you think that this visit is going to be pivotal when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine? Are we going to see any new development as a result of Modi's visit, or do you think it's still business as usual? Maybe scales being tipped a little bit, but we're still going to see pretty much the same situation?
I think it's more symbolic than like real politic. Of course, we can learn that during this visit, Modi discussed with Putin, with Zelensky, with Duda about the possible negotiation plan. But to be honest, that every change in the battlefield in the war in Ukraine, it's happened now in the Kursk Oblast, now happening in a completely different place, not in the Modi office in New Delhi. But of course, we need to understand that India is growing as a global partner, and with what we mentioned a few minutes ago, that we see that the rising bilateral cooperation, multilateral cooperation, we see that China trying to find a new partner, India trying to find a new partner. Also, what is really interesting that India is trying to also be, in BRICS, in BRICS bloc, and trying to, play in many pianos at the same time. And we will observe that, I think, more observe in the next year, next decades for sure.
But we also need to remember that India is trying to loosen its dependence on Russia. So, for example, 10 years ago, Russia contributed for like 78% of Indian arms imports, and now it's like 36%, something like that. So, if we strengthen our relationship with India, we will have more leverage on India and its decisions be it on the internal arena or the global arena.
And also we need to understand that we have in Poland rising numbers of the Indian citizens. We're trying to study in Poland, find a job, and so on. And this
study not so easy.
Yes,
according to visa problems. Yes. So I hope this was also a subject of discussions between Donald Tusk and Modi. How about visas? If you want to import 25,000 Indian doctors to Poland, which is an amazing number. How can we stop 10,000 Indian students?
Right.
Yes. So this is I think perhaps the most important real factor of this visit, because others are symbolic and so on, big shape and.
So we do see that perhaps in the front line is still the deciding point of the conflict in Ukraine, but Modi's visit does give us a trajectory of where the future might lie. Thank you guys so much for the input. And with that, we can pivot towards our next topic, because as our guest Jacek had just mentioned, the situation in the Kursk region is going to be the deciding factor of how the wind blows in the next few days. So without further ado, let's get into our next report.
Ukraine launched a surprise attack across its border on August 6th into Russia's Kursk region, clashed with the Russian forces and captured an estimated 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory so far.
This is the whole purpose of Ukraine's campaign, to bring the war back home to Russians. Russians have been acting like ostriches in the last 3 years. They've been sort of burying their heads in the sand and saying, we don't want to know anything about this war.
Ukrainian forces have advanced between 28 and 35 kilometers into the region and have so far taken control of over 93 settlements, including the town of Sudzha. 3 bridges on the same river have also been destroyed in the surprise offensive. US-made HIMARS rocket systems were used in the attacks. To tackle the incursion, the Russian Defense Ministry has decided to increase its military presence in regions bordering Ukraine and assigned officials to coordinate military security efforts in Belgorod, Bryansk and Kursk, including logistics, military and technical support, civilian evacuations, engineering and medical support. As thousands of local Kursk residents were fleeing the combat zone in a disorganized manner, Moscow announced that they would be evacuated. Some of them.
The local officials just got themselves and their families out. There was no organized evacuation. People tried to get out on their own, but failed.
On Friday, a Ukrainian drone struck an ammunition depot near the Russian town of Ostrogoshk in the Voronezh region.
Today, the first and successful combat use of our new weapon, a completely new class of weapon, the Ukrainian Palanitsia drone missile, took place. This is our new method of retaliation against the aggressor.
The aircraft, which resembles a cruise missile with larger wings and wheels, has a reported range of about 1,500 kilometers. Its name, Palanitsia, is a shibboleth, a word notoriously difficult to pronounce correctly for non-native speakers of Ukrainian. It was used to distinguish Russian soldiers from Ukrainian troops in the early days of the invasion.
So Jacek, you gave us a little bit of preview about this topic just earlier, and you mentioned that a lot of the predominating kind of theory about the incursion into the Kursk region is to have a bargaining chip for negotiation in the upcoming peace summit. Of course, there's also other lines of thinking. Some are saying that it's perhaps an attempt to divert Russians' attention in the Donbass region to have them pull out its troops. Some are even saying that it's an attempt at destroying Putin's credibility within the country. What kind of theory do you subscribe to, or do you think it's a little bit of all?
There's another one as well, to have a success. Because it was really easy success.
Right, for the morale, right?
Yes. So this is very important during the war. And I think all of them, all of these explanations are right. And also to show Western politicians, especially Americans, that if they will not let Ukrainians use Western weapon as Ukrainians like, then they will find another way to attack Russia, moving like 30 kilometers closer to Moscow. They have also much bigger range of their weapons on Russian territory. This is 30 kilometers closer to Russia with for Ukrainian rockets. So I think all these explanations are important, and the fact is that this is a game changer. I mean, we now don't speak about Ukraine losing. We are speaking about Ukraine losing on one front and gaining on another one, and so on and so on. Absolutely different debate.
Right. Like Jacek mentioned, this is also a showcase to the West that Ukraine does have the capacity to change the status quo. And I think Zelensky also highlighted the fact that maybe it is time that the West take the shackles off of the Ukrainian troops and let them utilize these Western weapons, as we've seen that Russia's threat of crossing some sort of imaginary red line is pretty much nothing more than just a threat. Do you subscribe to that belief?
what we see after the West reaction on the Kursk offensive, that we still see that the West still count on the neo-totalitarianism Russia, but stable. And they cannot imagine a situation when something change so fast, like, for example, the Prigozhin immunity in the last year. That the White House, Paris, Berlin is really concerned about for example, in next month we will not discussing about the Kursk offensive. Maybe we can discuss about the South Belarusian offensive. Yes, that may be possible. That the Ukraine is trying to push
Look how polite is Lukashenko these days to Ukrainians.
Yes, of course, we see
nice things and so on.
Yes, we see this dance between the Putin, between the Zelensky and West, and trying to find some balance. But also, what is really interesting, what we see during this Kursk offensive, that there is no red lines. You can imagine that a few years ago we will discuss like some country attacked the Russia territory and Kremlin did nothing, and why Putin did nothing with this situation. This is dangerous, question, because what is the answer? He waiting for some kind of chaos on Kremlin and trying to gain more power. I don't know.
All right, so there's still a lot to take into consideration here. Mr. Drabik just brought up a very interesting perspective about the West kind of preferring stability, and some might call it like a normalcy bias. Do you think that this move that Zelensky has taken is forcing the West to adapt to this more dynamic situation on the front line and the situation in this war, Mr. Łobodziński?
I believe that any kind of situation like a regime change situation or civil war situation in Russia would be a catastrophe. We would be seeing crazy people going after nukes, and maybe using them as chips in some kind of power struggle, aside from military struggle all around Russia. This would be a catastrophe for Europe and for our security. So I guess European politicians are thinking this way. Yeah. Nevertheless, taking ground in Russia is a good bargain chip when it comes to peace, and maybe regaining some lands in Donbas. Since the start of the war, we've been hearing that this war will be decided in Donbas. Now the question is open whether this is true.
All right, Karolina, what's your take on it? Like Mr. Łobodziński just said, things are changing.
Mostly I think about the elections in the United States, because with Joe Biden no longer running for his second term, he has a few months left in office, and we know that he's a big supporter of Ukraine, so maybe he will try to do something big for Ukraine, as he no longer has to care so much about American public, which is not so much supportive of aiding Ukraine anymore. So maybe that will somehow influence the strict policy on using Western weapons, American weapons, on the Russian territory. So yeah, I agree with everything that everyone has already said. It's a good news. It caught Russia off guard. It's even funny to see how Putin is trying to play down the whole situation. He's barely talking about it. He's using words such as situation, and yeah, so that's definitely
it's just a special military withdrawal.
Well, the problem is Donbas is not only territory. It's also raw materials, important for all sides. I mean, us in the West, Americans, Chinese, and Indians. And so it's for us, for everybody, it's important who controls these raw materials in Donbas. That's why it's not so easy to, for example, to exchange 1,000 square kilometers around Kursk for 1,000 square kilometers in Donbas, because it means something different.
Right. 1,000 square kilometers here and 1,000 square kilometers there doesn't necessarily mean the same thing. Yeah. Exactly. We can't just look at the numbers, right? Mr. Drabik, Karolina brought up a very interesting aspect of the timing of this Kursk incursion, and of course, people have been saying that this move is probably taken also as a precaution for what might change in the future. Do you think how substantial do you think the upcoming U.S. election is going to affect the situation in Ukraine? Ukraine? And do you think that it does indeed have anything to do with the timing of this incursion?
Yes, of course, that the U.S. election influenced not only on the war in Ukraine, influenced on the whole geopolitical stuffs and so on. But we also need to remember about the basic military theories, like the Ukraine need to start this offensive now before the fall, before the winter, because they have time, to gain the territory. And what we mentioned a few minutes ago, they have something new point in the negotiation, okay, Putin, so we have 30 kilometers inside your territory. You need to left this place. We can left this territory, and we can discuss now. So of course that if Donald Trump win the election, and what we see that the people who are very close to the Donald Trump, they are support option to starting very quick the negotiation between the Ukraine and Russia. Okay, negotiation in our mind is something completely different than in the US and Republicans politicians' mind. So we can understand that the results of this election, of course, can influence what the Zelensky did in the battlefield.
Right. So definitely there is a possibility that this incursion is also pushed because of the uncertainty in the situation in the United States. Mr. Łobodziński, what about military logistics? Because people are also saying that this incursion, the timing of it, also has to do with perhaps the weather before things start to get rainy and muddy and making it very hard to advance. How much do you subscribe to the more kind of military logistic perspective, or how much do you think it is more politically?
Many military analysts said that somehow Ukraine did its homework, because last time the counteroffensive came too late, so the weather came back, autumn started, and there was no space for maneuver for tanks and so on. But right now, somehow they grasp the action, starting the counteroffensive or incursion this time into Kursk Oblast in the summer, at the start of the summer especially. So right now, I think it somehow changed the situation in Ukraine, and it shows us that there are a lot of military lessons to be learned there, even by Ukrainians, but right now by the Russians.
All right, so of course this is still a very much developing situation. There's still a bit of fog of war. There's a situation that we are yet to understand, but thank you guys so much for your input and insight, and we'll dissect this further as more information surface. In the meantime, let's move on to our last topic of discussion, because, Georgia's politics have taken a strange turn where the nightmarish landscape lies ahead. The ruling party has said that if they win a constitutional majority, they might ban the biggest opposition party from even running. So let's take a look at a report.
Although the dog days of summer are approaching, Georgia's politicians remain in the heat of electoral campaigns. Set for late October, the elections have taken on a new meaning this week, as voters will not only decide who sits in the parliament, but also who will even be allowed to.
What we're observing now, Georgian Dream is in power for the last 12 years now, and now they realize that their reign is coming to the end, so they have the hysterical fear, and they need to show somehow to their voters that they're not afraid, and their major line of propaganda in this election is that they're going to ban the UNM or any associated opposition party with the UNM.
In the eyes of the Georgian Dream, the United National Movement, UNM for short, and its founder Mikhail Saakashvili were responsible for the 2008 Russian invasion of Georgia. They also said the UNM wants to open a second front in the ongoing war in Ukraine. While the party has been unable to provide any evidence supporting the claim, the statement is enough for them to consider making the largest opposition force in the Georgian parliament unconstitutional. Meanwhile, the honorary leader of the ruling party and the richest man in Georgia, Bidzina Ivanishvili, has been decried by critics as an unofficial ally of the Kremlin. Ivanishvili amassed much of his vast wealth by doing business in Russia. While the ruling party claims they need a majority in parliament to make their dreams of outlawing the opposition come true, analysts say they could still appeal to the Constitutional Court to ban any party promoting war or violence without a majority. With elections inching closer by the day, 6 of the main Georgian opposition parties decided to team up to curb Georgian Dream's ambitions and give the ruling party a wake-up call.
Mr. Drabik, question. What? Because now so many questions when it comes to this particular situation.
For us, it sounds ridiculous, but when we observe what's happening now in Georgia, it's showing in nutshell, how democracy now is under threat and how civil society can change it. Because when I speak last with the Georgian journalists, they told me that this whole energy, what we saw in the spring protests in Tbilisi, in the different Georgian cities, that they cannot lose that. And I know that just after the 26th of October parliamentary election, we will observe for sure that the new wave of the protests, because many, especially young Georgian people, cannot agree with the situation where the Georgian Dream, by the way, this name of this party, is like, pure propaganda, and they can lose, all of the decades, of the fighting for the freedom and independent position of the Georgia. And what we see also in this proposition from the Georgian Dream, we see that they also trying to start some kind of negotiation with Russia around the South Ossetia and Abkhazia, which is for most of the Georgian is like the completely unacceptable, because for most of the Georgian, this is a part of the Georgian country, and cannot the situation when, for example, that we sacrifice the Abkhazia on South Ossetia for some kind of like the business benefits and so on.
All right, they used the word peaceful negotiation with Russia when it comes to these regions, but we all know Russia, and we all know that once it's got its teeth sink into these regions, peaceful probably means concession. Do you think that's the case? Sorry, I should address it to Karolina.
Okay. Well, Georgians should perfectly know how it is with Russians after the 2008 war. And when we see Georgians, the majority of the population still supports the European Union, NATO, joining both institutions. However, there is a big problem with the rural society in Georgia that is trying to divert more to Russia, because after the communism fell, they were left behind in the country. So I don't know if any negotiations are currently an option for Georgians still. But what we see is that there are 2 options for Georgia right now. Either EU or becoming another Belarus, or what we see on the screen behind us, North Korea, maybe.
Right. We are looking at a very pivotal moment here, but we're also looking at Georgian ruling party being one of very, very unpopular right now, with 6 different parties coming together to stop them from getting into power. Do you think that it is possible that the Georgian Dream will be able to take power again with this kind of vast unpopularity?
I mean, we have to see, but looking at the history, we've seen 2 different elections they have actually won, 2016, 2020. Right now, they are able also, they've got so much political power to be able to impose the foreign agents bill and so on. So maybe they will have enough political power to do also that. When we examine authoritarian regimes, we often somehow forgot that people support them. There are people behind those parties who are trying to enact different authoritarian measures, and they are supporting them actively. So maybe we are losing something from the picture. I mean, I've heard that many Georgians actually, after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, made a lot of profitable businesses thanks to Russian sanctions. To somehow divert from the sanctions, Russia actually used Georgia as a gateway to other markets. So maybe that's somehow an explanation for that. But nevertheless, there might be political power to impose such bills. We've seen that with foreign agents.
All right. right. Mr. Łobodziński brought up a very interesting point, and that kind of brings me to the question, Mr. Jacek, do you think we are in such kind of mindset that we just take kind of democracy for granted, not believing that, well, a party coming out straight out being authoritarian would somehow still gain popularity? Do you think that's the case where people actually support these kind of authoritarian movements?
Well, we live in Poland. We know there are many people supporting authoritarian movement, even in Central Europe, not even speaking of far Eastern Europe. But I would rather compare it to the situation of Turkey. They were waiting for so long to be seriously considered as EU member that finally they came to the conclusion that it's not realistic, and they turned to authoritarian idea of Turkish state from the pro-Western, pro-European. And I think similar things may happen in Georgia, because they are waiting for a long time. They are not big moves, and it doesn't seem European Union is ready to consider seriously Georgia as a member. And people feel humiliated. The same happened in Turkey. So they may turn against European Union, against these selfish Westerners, to a community of Vladimir Putin. And, well, it sounds horribly, I know, but it's how political psychology works. So, and now I see the European Union is freezing talks with Georgia. This is huge mistake. We should still demonstrate that we are ready, we are waiting, we welcome, and so on, all these polite things to avoid turning Georgia totally to Russia.
All right, Mr. Drabik, do you think, do you subscribe to that belief that kind of it's probably a political miscalculation to separate Georgia from the discussion of any EU accession talks, and that would probably push them farther away from the European path and right into Russia's arms?
Of course, some part of the Georgian citizens feel tired, waiting from the EU accession, NATO negotiation and so on. But we need to know that Georgia is one of the last democracy in this part of the world, in Caucasian. What we see in the neighborhood, we have Armenia, which is basically in the depression, after losing the Nagorno-Karabakh. We have Azerbaijan, when the Aliyev, building the more autocracy, maybe neo-totalitarianism, country. And also we see the big influence of the Turkey and what Russia trying to do in Georgia. Also, we need to understand that after the announcement, partly mobilization in Russia, many Russians go to Georgia, and what the Georgian citizens talk to me that we are afraid of these Russians because they go to our country, they're starting the business, that the Georgian government still waiting for the money from the Moscow oligarchs, businessmen. They trying to using the Georgia as a laundry, for their money. So the results of this election will be very important and showing, that which way Georgia they can go. And of course, we will hear like the many good words, from the Brussels, Paris, Washington, like we support the Georgian democracy and so on. We also observed that during the last democracy protests, but we don't see like any very important move to push Georgia into the Western community, let's say.
All right, Drabik mentioned here, the hesitancy on the West's part perhaps might deter these countries from, being more Western and being driven into Russia. Do you think there's any countries that might share the same fate? Moldova, for example, has also been waiting forever for any sort of signal from the European Union, and they are having their elections later this year. Mr. Łobodziński, do you think that this might be a similar situation?
I mean, for a couple of years, European Union has had its problem of its own, So there was no talk about inviting other countries into our threshold. But right now we are in a situation, in a confrontation with Russia. So I would say that Georgia, for some reason, was treated the same as, let's say, Western Balkans or Macedonia. before, or Turkey. But at the same time, the strategic importance of Georgia is much, much bigger than than the rest of these countries. So right now, I guess we are paying for our own sins when it comes to this matter, and I'm not surprised that many people feel somehow ashamed, tired of this never-ending talks with European Union. So yeah, I guess somehow we've brought it upon ourselves.
Right, it is a big machine, and to move that, it does indeed take some time. But of course, time is of the essence, and we are looking down a very pivotal moment. Thank you guys so much for all your input and insights. It's been a very fruitful discussion. Really appreciate it. Thank you guys for being with us on TVP World.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And meanwhile, thank you guys for watching. This has been Press Corner. For more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.